So now that we've wrapped up our review on these suspension shock absorbing hitches, you know, it's time we talk about some of the results and some of the things that probably I could have done better in this test. But the good thing is the data does show that there is a difference in how different hitches perform from a shock absorption perspective. I think the one change I would probably make would be a significant one, and it would be one that would probably yield even better results. So we may do that in a future video, but let's talk about the results that we've been able to gather thus far. Hang tight, I'll be right back. Okay, so what this test taught me was that the different weights that you can put on the back of these hitches not only matter, but it can matter in such an extreme way that even if you have a suspension hitch, you may either not be doing enough to make it work or doing too much and not giving it the ability to work well. Falling right in between what the ranges are for these hitches to work, I think is pretty important. And also understanding what some of the usage of different aspects of suspension require for them to work better. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. But first and foremost, let's go through the hitches and talk about the tests that we did. If you didn't see those videos, I made a whole series on videos with these hitches. Each one of them got their own video to show you how it performed hauling about 2,000 pounds worth of tongue weight. The only one that was reduced was the CURT, which was about 1,300 pounds, simply because this one doesn't have the capacity as the rest of them from a rating perspective. This one's 15,000 pounds. All the rest of these are 21,000 pounds or greater in terms of what their capacity ratings. So we put it at 2,000 pounds worth of tongue weight. And again, let's kind of go through here and recap on what happened. So the first hitch that we started with was the Shocker hitch right here. This is the 3-inch shank version of the Shocker HD. It's got a 2,000 pound tongue weight capacity and a 20,000 pound towing capacity. Now, this hitch performed what I would probably say is at the best or nearly the best amongst all the rest of the hitches. The only one that seemed to have very similar performance was the CURT, which we'll talk about here in a second. But from a shock absorption perspective, you could absolutely see from the data that shock was significantly reduced. It looks probably about 30% reduced from the standard hitch that has no shock absorption. And we used the standard Gen Y Mega hitch with no shock absorption. It wasn't the Boss series to give us a baseline of what the shock looked like before performing this test. But I went over 4 different surfaces, really 5, but 4 of them, all of them kind of varied in terms of how bumpy they were, but they all kind of lent themselves to a really harsh ride in general. So even having a shock absorbing hitch and it reducing the amount of shock that was transferring through the hitch into the vehicle, most of the roads were still so poorly maintained that even if you have a shock absorbing hitch in the cab, you may not notice too much of a difference. But the results were pretty good, right? It told you that the shock was reduced by a good amount, and this performed well. In the video, you could definitely see a good amount of movement. And when I say a good amount of movement, of all the hitches, you absolutely can tell that this portion is rotating with the airbag functioning the way that they show you. It was really moving a lot. So I'd have to say from an overall movement perspective, and from what it appears to be doing from a function perspective, the Shocker hitch really does function the way it wants to from a movement aspect. Again, from what I felt inside of the vehicle, I could definitely tell that it wasn't as harsh as it was with the standard static hitch, but at the same time, the roads that I chose were just unbelievably bumpy. So you really saw this thing move. And in the cab, from a passenger perspective, it was a little harder to differentiate between what it was like with this versus not having a hitch with shock absorption built into it. So I hope that makes sense. But the numbers show that this hitch did perform pretty dang well in reducing the overall amount of shock that transferred into the vehicle. The next hitch in the evaluation is this 21,000 pound Boss. This is the Gen Y Boss series with torsion flex technology. Basically, you have these torsion tubes with rubber beads inside here. They twist against those. The issue I have with the Gen Y product is not how it's built or even what its function is. I believe that the rubber beads, because it was really cold outside, probably are going to be a little stiffer when it's colder, and when they warm up in the hot sun or in a hotter environment where they're really nice and pliable, that they'll probably move a little bit more. With 2,000 pounds worth of tongue weight on here, which is actually at about I'm going to say probably about 60% of what they say to put on here. You can be anywhere between about 1,400 and 2,400 pounds worth of tongue weight to get this thing to actuate. But at 2,000 pounds, you could see it moving. You could absolutely see these torsional bars slightly moving. They weren't moving up and down like you might think, or like possibly would have happened if we went with the lighter duty 16,000 pound rated version of this hitch. So they were absolutely moving, and you could see the results of the data showed that they were moving in such a way that it still was taking off the harshest of hits, basically those spikes, that really, really harsh peak hit whenever you go over the bumps. So again, from a passenger perspective in the vehicle, they didn't feel like, neither of these felt like they were doing like a phenomenal job soaking up all the bumps, but you could definitely tell where having that shock absorption technology was reducing the severity of those bumps, and that actually is what the function is, right? If we were going over a less bumpy road, or some of the roads that might have been less bumpy, or if these tubes were warmer, you would probably be able to kind of sense more that it's reducing the bumps, especially on a longer trip. But for the route that we took, you could absolutely see it functioning. I zoomed in during the video so you could see it kind of close up. They weren't moving a heck of a lot, but they were definitely taking some of the sharpness out of the bumps that we were going over. So I was pretty impressed with the Gen Y, and it also performed very well from a graphical perspective, showing you how much shock was actually transferring into the vehicle versus a hitch that has no suspension characteristics built into it. All right, so moving on to the Bulletproof. So this is the Extreme series from Bulletproof, 36,000 pound tow capacity, like 6,500 pound tongue weight capacity. We have the road suppressor system that's attached to the front of it, which has a 2,000 pound rating. So you're really supposed to have between 1 and 2,000 pounds worth of tongue weight on this. We were at the 2,000 pound mark. So in the video, you could see a couple things happening. First of all, there was so much downward vertical weight that the bottom cushion right here, this plastic or rubber cushion right here, was pretty much being compressed the entire time. Now, some folks may say it really wasn't functioning because of that, but you could see in the video that it was functioning. It actually was moving. There wasn't a lot of movement from the top, but there was certainly movement from the bottom, which means it was rotating like this. Again, when you're talking about downward vertical pin weight, you're really only going to see that weight transferring down to the bottom rubber bushing. The top one, though it's there, it acts more as a rebound dampener, right? So when the hitch comes back up a little bit, it kind of is going to prevent it from moving too much in the upward position. But the reality of it is, this is the bushing that's really doing all of the suspension, the bottom one. And this one also reduced the shock, but you could tell from the information that was captured that it did not reduce it as much as the Gen Y Boss or as the Shocker. But inherent to this design, it just honestly seems as if the design itself would kind of lend itself to a less functional suspension shock absorbing type manner, because again, most of the weight can only move in a rotational direction. It's moving down, and because this was pretty dang compressed with the weight, there wasn't a tremendous amount of movement. So it might have still been taking off some of those little peaks, those little jarring, very, very harsh jarring episodes. But just like the Gen Y, there wasn't a tremendous amount of movement, but the Gen Y seemed to perform quite a bit better than the Bulletproof. So did the Shocker. Now, finally, we also tested the CURT. So this is the CURT Rebellion XD. And to be honest with you, it was kind of an unfair comparison because we did have to reduce the weight in order to meet the 1,500 pound maximum tongue weight capacity. We put 1,300 pounds worth of tongue weight on it, but it performed exceptionally well. I'm very, very pleased with how the CURT performed in terms of what it was doing from a shock dampening perspective. I did not know what to expect going into this one, and this one kind of acted as a bit of a wild card, but again, we had significantly less weight on it because we had to go with what it was rated to. And quite frankly, it did well with the weight that we had. And you can look at the graphical chart and it shows that this one also performed pretty dang well. So in order of performance, it would appear, again, based on the weight that we had, this one being about 600 pounds lighter of tongue weight pressing down on it than the others, this one seemed to do the best in terms of managing the tongue weight. Now, what I'll likely do is a lighter duty version of this test, where we just test the CURT versus the lighter duty Gen Y with the 16,000 pound maximum towing capacity and 1,600 pound hitch weight capacity. Actually, maybe a little bit more than that, but I think this one's 1,600 pounds because the torsional arms on this one should move a lot more under load more comparatively speaking to the CURT. And we could always throw one of the shocker hitches back in as well for that test, because the good thing about airbags is you can kind of dial it into your load just based off of what they tell you to do from an airbag, inflation perspective. That said, what did you guys think? I was trying to be as fair, unbiased, and accurate as I could be with the equipment I had and the way I was doing the test. Went over 4 different types of road surfaces, all pretty unique, and I can honestly tell you that they all reduced the amount of shock versus a traditional static hitch that doesn't move, but some definitely performed a little better. And if I had to rank the ones based on pure heavy-duty capability, I'd have to say the Shocker and the Gen Y were very close in terms of results, and that's saying a lot considering the Shocker technically has a lot more movement because it's an airbag. And then the Bulletproof came in at a pretty far third place, but the CURT was kind of the wild card again. Loaded up with less weight, really gave it the ability to shine, and I think that it did well for what we subjected it to. But again, another test will probably come soon, and we're going to test different hitches in a different way. And this hitch will probably still be part of the test, that Gen Y, as well as other hitches that might also fit into that category for shock absorption. One thing I'm going to do different in that test, and let me show you what it is. I'll be using this. So this is a wireless Bluetooth shock sensor that I can mount on the actual trailer or the tongue to specifically see what the shock looks like in the reduction from that area of the truck or trailer. So this is going to give me kind of an isolated capability of showing you how much shock is being reduced and what that shock looks like directly at the hitch, which I think a lot of people would want me to do. We may retest all the hitches at a future date, but this is definitely going to help me out and really get me data that is more isolated to what's taking place at the connection point. So we will use this for the future test, and hopefully it will help us yield the results that are more accurate and will give you a better understanding of exactly how these suspension shock absorbing hitches work. Anyways, please drop a comment below. Let me know what you thought. Let me know if you had a favorite, if this changed your opinions of any of them, or if this solidified your opinions of any of them. Please drop a comment below. And especially if you utilize any of these, how functional has it been for you? Can you really feel the difference? If you have any hitches that you think I should add to this evaluation, also include those. I know that AirSafe is going to be a brand that people definitely suggest, so I'll probably reach out to them to see if I can get a sample of their hitch so I can include it in that evaluation as well. Because just like the Shocker, you really don't need to be at like maximum capacity in order for those hitches to work also. That said, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your comments and feedback on the videos, as well as suggestions moving forward. Guys, if you haven't had a chance, please take a moment, subscribe to the channel, give me a thumbs up, and we'll talk to you again very soon.